Hello again, it's Mark Inman, producer for Plants of the Apes Last Frontier for the Imaginarium. This is the second part of the interview that I did with Stephen Coltart. This one concentrates a little bit more on the audio design side of things. We still talk about the music, but the focus is very much more on the spot effects, the ambience, because getting the atmospherics of the game right is just as important as the music compositions that are in the game. So we focus mainly on that, and then there are some questions from the audience, and also Gina chips in with a couple of questions. And we do go back to the music, but as I say, the focus for this one is very much more on the audio design aspect of things. So we'll jump back into the conversation now. I'll be back at the end of the interview. But for now, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the interview with Stephen Coltart. Coming to the actual audio design side of things, the Foley, that sort of thing, how much day-to-day involvement did you have on that? How much of it was your work? How much of it did Alex and the team over in the Imaginati sort of involve?
So creatively, I and actually technically, so all sound design and music was created by myself. The ambiences were also recorded by myself, which was a huge undertaking. And then what we had was later in the project, so literally last couple of months, we got an additional sound designer involved called Callum. Callum I'd known from, he was actually one of my, I used to be a teacher previous to going professionally in games, and Callum was one of my ex-students, and he lived in Norwich. And so I got Callum involved, and he took over some of the sound design responsibility towards the end, using the content that I'd created and adding to it where he felt necessary. But other than that, everything else was me. And so one of the things that I feel was really, really important from want to be a composer in games or a sound designer in games is that you understand technically how to implement, because that is something that is a skill that really, really helps you to get work. It makes you much more employable if you can do those things. And I think there is definitely going to be a trend where up and coming new talent coming into the industry will have that skill set as much as the creative audio work. It's it's an obvious thing to say, but having an understanding is really crucial to being able to communicate with programmers, but equally give you a chance to work on more projects, because like I say, you're across a few different specialisms. It's T-shaped learning, I call it. And I'm sure you've heard that too. So you know a little bit about lots of different areas. You focus on one thing, but because you know enough about those other areas, it helps you to create something that is properly bespoke for that project that you're working on.
I know you said before that you spent about 2 years overall on the how much of that was sort of the sort
the
of
splits
side
across.
Of things,
Yeah, so I like I say, music themes were definitely made. So that was one of the initial things we did together. So we had a map of the game, and I created ideas of how it could go for the music, but timings couldn't be created. The cues couldn't be created until we had picture lock. So music was very much quite a lot at the beginning and towards the end. The middle section was sound design and ambience based. And so let's say a lot of the content I'd actually be going out and physically recording. So I went out to farms to record cows and horses. I actually this is a true story. I paid a farmer in cider and ginger beer so that I could get access to the farm to be able to record. Again, just trying to go above and beyond to make something different. But equally, sort of, there was one day that it was snowing during this period, that a proper snow day. And for anyone who's played the game, there's lots of content in the game that is based in that scenario. So I literally went out with a portable recorder, a windshield, and recorded day, night with a snowstorm. So hours and hours of ambient content, and then that got taken down into a good 10-minute loop, I suppose, for each period of the day, and that's what was used in the game. So it's all these extra things that all of you could quite easily do. I used £100 off eBay portable recorder. It's nothing special. It's called a Zoom H2N for anyone who's interested, and that records in surround as well as stereo. And yeah, that coupled with doing Foley, so all of the movements for the characters, I'd put on different coats. I would use contact mic, which basically then, as sort of the name implies, it attaches to your body. So then you're picking up again that those details that you need. All of those things that you wouldn't actually, unless you're really listening, you'd never know it was there. If it wasn't there, you would feel like something's missing. And it was that sort of thing that I loved doing because I could work to renders in that way. Normally with a game, things like footsteps you would attach to a movement, and you'd have lots and lots of different footstep variations. With this, it was treated as if it was a film again, so I'd actually be acting out the content to the scene. And this is what Callum also did towards the end of the project too. So it was a real fusion between film and game approaches.
As we've kind of touched upon, there was quite a lot of difficulties within the process just because of delays and what have you, and things weren't coming at you as quickly as you like. In an ideal situation, because I've always been a firm believer that you want to at least have music that's at least representative of where you want to go.
Yeah.
Sort of pre-alpha.
Yeah.
How do you feel with actual sound designs? Where do you feel that fits? Where do you feel sort of optimally you want to be in a good place? The audio design to be.
So the challenge with this one was that alpha. We obviously had like a playthrough for every scene. So I was bespoke scoring the music and also doing the sound effects for that stage. The reality is that because it is like it's Foley to picture, because the timings changed. I think for probably about 80% of the game I had to redo because the timings were different. The scenes went in a different direction. If something got added in the background, then we had to add that in to a session. So there was literally hundreds and hundreds of Pro Tools sessions that we just kept going back to. And same for music, that whilst the score was written for Alpha, I have to say it was nowhere near finished product. It was just because I wanted to use live performance as well as virtual instrumentation on the score, and there's no point investing in live performance until you know that you've got picture lock, because it's just going to be different. And so that was the big challenge, that it was just so many changes that across the whole thing, that whilst I think, like you say, it was probably 12 hours of audio content, I probably easily duplicated that, if not tripled, because of just the nature of the workflow for the game. That's not a negative. It's just how we learn from that process, and we'll do it differently. If we did a similar project, it would be done differently because we know the pros and cons of working in that way.
I'm guessing you know numbers. How about you give us one? How many apes are there?
You did this! It is war!
Yeah, I mean, again, from my perspective, having worked in the past with we had quite a good relationship with a music label, and they were kind of we almost had two layers of sort of communication with the musicians. So they were providing us stuff. It was going through Sony's layer of their two audio guys, and then once it kind of came down to sort of us as the developer, it was kind of like, okay, well, this piece of music, you know, after you've made all these kind of refinements from the technical side, yeah, it's not suitable for us.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, but we had that constant dialogue from. As I said to you before, we'd kind of put together a wish list on Spotify of sort of, you know, these ideal sort of tracks that we'd want, that we never dreamt that we get to use them, but you know, as it turned out, we did. But you know, we then had a sort of steady dialogue in the way that we didn't on Apes, and obviously from that makes your it makes it much more challenging to create any sort of audioscape if you're sort of like getting stuff last minute and kind of having to sort of basically go at it and go, okay, well, does this work? Is this fine?
I think that's it. That there's two ways you could look at it. I think it's very, very important to have, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in audio, but to have someone at the early stages will make your game better. That's just the reality, because you can be invested in the project as well, and not just feel like you've been tagged on. But there's timings that don't feel like you're offending someone if if your game's not quite ready for music because you haven't got to that stage yet. That's not a bad thing. It's better to do that than to have someone do things twice, three times, and it goes. There's a process that you can agree together that works. So I think with the nature of this project, rather than doing music that's bespoke scored, that a lot of the content's going to change, that probably wasn't the best approach. We should have waited and done the music a little bit later, and an alpha build was just focused on ambience and sound design, some things that you knew weren't going to change, and that's just a learning from what happens. But I'm really, really proud of that project because of the amount of detail we went into it, and all of these things that happened contributed to that end result. So it's certainly not anything I regret. It's just something that that you pick up on and you can improve upon for future working relationships.
Just to explain in a little bit more detail why some of these things happened, it was that studio's first project, and I did have to staff up quite aggressively to sort of like get the project done, which obviously kind of doesn't help because you've got people who are learning on the job. You've got, it quite quickly there was a lot of sort of plate spinning going on, which in a much more sort of structured development flow would have meant that Steve would have had much more time to be able to sit there and almost score it in a way that you kind of see film and a game score's being done where they've kind of got the footage and they can kind of sit there and compose to it, rather than kind of being given sort of chunks.
And it was such honestly, an amazing team of people. Like when I went down to the studio and you're seeing the art that's being created, and you see the mocap studio and how they're working technically with that, and the direction of Martin, and it was just a really amazing project and unique again as well. And I think some of those things you don't always get to see because you're not involved in that sort of behind the scenes process, but all of that contributed to a game that was true immersive narrative storytelling, which is a big thing now, and lots of other people are picking up on that.
So the game's finished, your audio design's finished. Is there anything that, with the benefit of hindsight, that you would go back and like to change?
I think the only thing that I found a challenge was being working remotely. So like I say, most of the time I'm working from my Norfolk, working from a studio in Norfolk. So it was a decent trek down to Ealing to be able to to be involved in every meeting. So we had things called obviously doing meetings via Skype, but there was some software called Slack. Have you heard of Slack before? Now, Slack was great because it's like an online chat. So we all had, if I wanted to talk to the director, or then I could via that, and people would just get back to you when they were able to. And that sort of interactivity really helped. We didn't bring that in until later in the project, and that's something that I think would have helped earlier as well.
Yeah, so I think certainly sort of a lot of teams I know use Slack and also Trello boards as kind of a perfect way of kind of like visualizing stuff. And I think that certainly from an audio point of view, I also think it helps when a developer has some sort of idea in their mind of, certainly from a music point of view, of, you know, this is the music that's in my head that goes with this game. See what your interpretation of
and that's it is. And you can't be too precious over what you do either. So I knew that, you know, I'd write a piece, and it was great having feedback from the director, so I could change those elements. But that just became a really time-consuming thing, because it's counterproductive to keep having meetings to discuss what you're doing, because then you haven't got enough time to actually do what you want to do. So Slack helped, because then you don't feel like that you're having to stop what you're doing. You just pick it up when you're able to. And I did get a lot of feedback from particularly from music, and that's what helped to shape the end result. But it was because I had themed templates to start with that meant that when we got to that end period where there was, like, you know, we basically rescoring the entire project again, that I had 90% of it done, and it was just timings that were changing rather than having to completely add new content to it. And so then I was able to bring in live performers to bring it to life, really. There's no substitute for actually having live performance on your work. So whilst virtual instruments are amazing and getting better always, you can't there's no substitute for having someone really, you know, perform live on it. So my strengths particularly are like piano based, and I started playing at an early age, so there's definitely lots of use of that in the score. But all of the drums and the big sort of taiko drums that you hear are again a characteristic of that genre. Lots of that was live recordings, creating my own own phrases that were used across multiple tracks. So it's just working clever again, being time efficient with what you record to make something again that is suitable for the game.
Is it worth playing a track from?
Yeah, great. Yeah. So this one is the actually used towards the end of the game, but this has got a mixture of both a quiet epic sound, so it's quite minimal at the beginning, and then brings all of the big drums and choral elements at the end.
Or it should be. Yeah, there we go. And that's not synthesized voice, that's an actual...
Yep, so that's a real vocal. So that's Emma Harvey Lawrence, who also worked with me on Into Lights and a couple of other projects as well. And I love her voice because she's got great range, so that real bottom ends, deep tone that's almost like an Alison Moyet for those that have watched Gladiator. Sort of a real sort of depth to her sound, but she can also hit the top notes too. So Emma's got a great tone that works with my style of music.
I was going to ask a question until you torpedoed it outside about the guitar style, and then you said that actually what you use is drums that have gone through several guitar pedals. How did you arrive at that and kind of go, oh, actually that sounds quite like a guitar?
Honestly, experimentation, but I use something called Guitar Rig, which is by a company called Native Instruments. I don't think I've actually ever used it on a guitar. It's designed for loads and loads of different effects that you normally have in a physical pedal form. But I particularly like it on piano and synths. Obviously synths aren't appropriate for this project, and so I wanted to go a little more traditional. But I used an old piano that had a characteristic sound to it. I mean, all of these things I could spend hours talking about, but as a quick summary, it was chosen again because I wanted it to sound particularly emotional for some of the characters. If I went and recorded a beautiful Steinway, I think it would sound completely out of place because it's not suited to that theme and that mood. So a way of being able to do that is by putting different effects and things on them. With the piano sounds, there's everything from chorus and lots of different reverse reverbs and delays, etc., all merged together, and it created like the twang from that you'd normally find like a banjo or a plucked guitar instrument, but it was actually all from a piano. And that's again is an area that I love to do because every project's slightly different. I don't want to use the same sounds because then I get a bit bored as a composer too. So whilst I have my own style, each project will have different original content, different sounds that are something that again is a standout for that project. So it's not just the piano sounding guitar. There was lots of the strings as well that I chopped up into. I actually started out in dance production, so I used to write dance music. So lots of the things that I do are very much from that type of production point of view as well. So there's loads of drones and soundscapes and things that make up my music that are split into different sections. So rather than playing a chord with one particular instrument, I'll split a chord out into individual notes, put them across loads of different instruments, and this is what creates an atmosphere that goes underneath. So there's not huge amounts of melody in Planet of the Apes: Last Frontier. A lot of it has been done with automation and dynamics, changes and variations, lots of things that make it sound like it's evolving, but it's not evolving through loads of hooks. It's evolving through texture, and that then makes room for the dialogue, which in a game like this is crucial. It's the most important part. So it would be madness of me to put loads and loads of big themes over the top of everything, because that's distracting from gameplay. It's making sure you're enhancing gameplay, not writing the stuff you like to write, in a particular big melodic way. It's an ambient soundscape approach that allows the dialogue to have room to breathe and be heard properly. So that's where I use effects and different approaches to treat traditional elements in a way that works like that.
Mark, you lead the way.
Jess! Over here! Hurry! Here! Take this!
Where's Mark? Why is he not with you?
He's probably already out! Which is where we should go! Reeves! Waterfall!
Mark!
Jess, got no time! Gotta go!
Is there anything, setting aside the actual instruments themselves, is there any sort of tool or tools that you basically couldn't live without these days?
Oh, good question. So I write everything. All my creative work is done in Logic, Apple Logic, and then all of my post-production work is done in Pro Tools. That's not because either is better than the other. It's just again a process that I particularly like to work with, and I find then having committing to content from a creative point of view, and then putting it into another bit of software to do the mixing and editing, which we haven't talked about yet, but I also did for the game. Then it gives you a point where you've got like a change of thought process, I suppose. If you do everything in the same bit of software, I find you can just keep adding and doing more things. So that's something that helped me. Something I definitely couldn't do without. An obvious thing is a piano, because that's obviously what everything was written on initially, and then I branched things out into different instruments afterwards. But yeah, I think that, and just having a creative space, something that you're comfortable with. I don't have loads and loads of outboard gear, and it's not a mix studio where you've got like a 128 channel desk and all those sorts of things. I've got a space that I know is sound treated to what I need it to be. I've got enough kit that I need to be able to write what I do, and then if I need to record other elements on projects that are slightly different to that, then I'll go somewhere else for it, that are bespoke created for that, because that's just a better way of working. And it also gets you to meet different people and to work in a different way, which is healthy.
When you say different, sort of like other people's studios, that sort of...
Yeah, so in my...
I know you use the outside space, you said you've used the outside space quite a lot with regards to Foley.
Yeah, I think so. For Planet of the Apes, it was very much from a sound design point of view that I tried different environments. On other projects, I've certainly recorded at different places, just because it lended itself to that. So, for example, I wouldn't be able to record a string quartet at my studio and those sorts of things. I'd go somewhere that's treated, is designed for that purpose. But all of solo work is all done at mine.
There's a particular band I like where they all separately recorded their own particular aspect of the final pieces remotely. Do you have you ever found yourself working where if you're working with another, do you work with other musicians? Have you ever done anything where basically you're delivering your bit or they're delivering their bit and you're doing your sort of part on top of theirs? Or?
Not in the game sense. As I sort of mentioned at the beginning, I work across different platforms. So I also write music for production libraries, so that it gets synced on TV. And I'm actually working on a trailer library with another composer at the moment. And that is exactly how we work. So I'm creating ideas on a track. I then send it over to the other composer. You obviously need to make sure you've got the same equipment to work in that way, so that it's a logistical point of view. You have to think about those things, and it's a back and forth. And I'm just using things like WeTransfer. It's nothing particularly stands out about that. But I've certainly seen other composers that will have a video feed, and they're working all around the world to a particular project, and just send stems across. Not something I've done in a game scenario.
No.
The tech is available to do that. As Gina was just about.
Yeah, please do if anyone wants to jump in at this point.
So roughly, how long would it take you to record like one section of the game's soundtrack? Like, say if you made a decision to do one thing,
Mm-hmm.
that section happened. How long would it take you to record that roughly?
So with Planet of the Apes, I worked on roughly about 10 minutes of render, right? And that's an important thing to explain. So in that 10 minutes of render, might be 5 minutes of music, there might be 10 minutes of music, but with the sound design, then there's potentially 10 minutes of footsteps. There's potentially 10 minutes of the hands movements, all those sorts of things. So it actually worked out as a lot more audio than 10 minutes. But roughly that's a day I had. So I worked. I mean, this was tight, but that was a sort of a template that I worked with. So that's why I worked 12-hour days. Because I had to do that amount of content for it.
Okay.
Other projects, I've had a year to do that amount, so it really does depend. There's no right or wrong.
You talk about audio design. What on earth is audio design?
So in your projects, in your games that you're designing, then an audio designer is someone who's going to create sound effects, but also implement it into your game too. So audio design is more of a fusion between creative and technical role. Generally, not all the time, but it would be creating, like say, sound effects, ambience, and implementing it into your projects. That's one of the roles that you'll see quite a lot for like graduate roles is audio design, sound designer, etc., audio programmer. All of those things mean slightly different things for each company, but that's roughly what it entails. Composition could be thrown into that, but not normally. It's classed as a separate role.
You talked about that you worked composing music for media other than video games.
Yes.
So how does the method change for video games specifically?
This particular project was as close to a film as I will probably get in a computer game, but with other projects I've done, it was more loop based. Like I say, in a film sense, you just don't work in that way, because it's that linear, non-linear, different way of approaching the project. So for films, I wouldn't start writing till again I get content through the picture lock. With games, you can do some stuff if it's looped form earlier, because it's not as time dependent, and then you can use things like Wise and Fmod and middleware, different software to put in behaviors, so that you can then, if you go into a particular element of the game, or if your health is lower, there's loads and loads of different approaches. You use audio middleware to create something that's more customized to your needs. So that's where it's different. It's very much more options with games, because you've got those. You want the player to have those options too.
How hard is it? Can I do it? Can I do audio stuff?
You can definitely do it, Jenna. Yeah, it's one of those that it becomes crucial to create your own content, because. So, do you know what I mean by virtual instrument? By the way, I'm probably taking that for granted. So I've got someone nodding their head just on the right hand side here. So what do I mean by virtual instruments?
Just a digital instrument that you could draw in notes with.
So it's MIDI based, and you'd use so virtual instruments don't mean just synthesis, but you can have choirs that you type in what they sing. You can have like really ultra realistic orchestral sounds, and there's particular companies that that do that. But you have licensing restrictions for those software too. So besides other people being able to buy it, and you obviously got to write with it. You can't just it's not like a song written automatically. You have to be careful of licensing and things like that. So that's where it can become. You need to have that understanding as much of the legal side as much as the creative stuff, and that's why you get someone who's a specialist in that area to help you. So, for instance, if you're using stock music, have you checked that it's royalty-free stock music, and is it able to be used for games, or do you have to give them a reference and a credit? If you're using music that is, classed as from another licensed composer, band, etc., then the likelihood is that you've got to offer permission for it beforehand. That's why you have dedicated composers that write stuff for you, because A, it's customized to your needs, and B, from a licensing point of view, that you're cool to use it. Otherwise, you could make a really good game and put something in it that is going to get you into trouble. And I think those are the areas that get overlooked as well, unless you love that particular field of what you do. You've all got your own strength areas. Into that development side, you've got to bring in people that have their strengths in the other roles to make that professional end product.
So as an example, the music within the game is actually owned by Fox. So even though Steve wrote it and we published it as the Imaginarium, because it's seen as part of the overall license, they retain ownership of it, and that sits within Fox Music. So it's really quite complex.
Yes, yeah.
Other things with that music.
And SoundCloud is one of those things that particularly annoys me, because people will just download stuff from there, and you've got to make sure that you've got permission and clearance to do so. Just because it sounds great in your project doesn't mean you can use it. Everything has got some form of copywriting or license attached to it. There is something called Creative Commons, which does make it a little bit more open, but just check what you're using. And there's loads of people out there that would love to write music for your games. There's loads of people out there that would love to do sound design for your games. So contact them. A couple of ways that again, a good way is to contact, if you're obviously in a university scenario here, so there may be departments, people here who love doing that behind the scenes. So there must be some form of like networking within the university, I'm sure, that you could tap into as an advert. I'll bring Mark in here.
Very different ways. Obviously, you can email us and we put you in touch with different course leaders so they can get in touch with their teams. We have people that contact us also that are composers that want to create audio for games. And speaking amongst yourselves,
Mhm.
you've got social networking out there, but talk to your peers, talk to people you don't necessarily talk to on a daily basis. Because it might be the case that actually they do this on their own time and they write music and are really, really up for writing the sound being the Foley for your game. So I think a lot of people do it as amateurs and do it as hobbyists. It's quite a good way to get into it as well.
And I would say on top of that, I'm actually game audio lead at a different uni, but at Hertfordshire University, and we've got 100 students who are all specialising in game composition, who want some games. Yeah, so there is, have a look. You can find people. It's all, it's one of those, I never give out direct links, because those that really want to find this will, you'll find it, and then it creates something that's unique for you. Also, there's websites like IndieDB and things where you could put adverts out. There is plenty of scope, and honestly, your work will be transformed by using these people, and you're in the right stage, of the process to create these links.
Can we hear some more music?
So we'd seen something like this lathe, for example. How much opportunity would you have to kind of, once your music in situ, did you do that, or did Alex kind of place the audio in?
No, I also implemented too. So basically, I had a PC from the studio that was literally all I had on it was Unreal, and so separate to my own computer, I'd mix everything down, bounce it, and then those finished scores got implemented into Sequencer, which is within Unreal, and we created a system where we use keys to then as like start stops for the music. So the ambience worked as loops, the music and sound design were bespoke start-stop keys within Sequencer, and that's what the ambience was done by Alex at the studio that I passed across, and he did the looped-based content. All of the bespoke stuff I did from my studio. So at the end of the day, I would once I finished it, implement it into the game, and then push it, and then they would pull it, using they're like Perforce and particular kit that studios are using to be able to download the assets.
How much of the ape grunting was done by you? Was this all the actors? Or?
So yeah, dialogue was the element that was captured at the mocap studio stage, I believe. So that's the one audio element that I must admit I wasn't involved with. And yeah, those were then sort of brought. The audio was then sort of implemented in as another stem within Sequencer. So it's all lined up at the end.
And my understanding, certainly from a bunch of the stuff that I've got hold of, is that a lot of it was stuff that was caught on stage.
Yes,
and then
exactly.
cleaned up.
Exactly that.
Which isn't really. That's a suboptimal way. I think you'd agree that that's a suboptimal way of capturing a game or game dialogue. You really want to do it in a clean sort of proper studio environment.
And of course, like when the scenes changed, so there were edits made, then you needed to make sure that the dialogue followed that. So there was a lot of lining up at the end. So again, this was at the very, very last stages of the project. There was no way I was going to be able to do music, sound design and dialogue at that stage, just impossible. So that's when at that point I focused on music, Callum focused on sound design, and then there was another guy in the studio who did dialogue, who was brought in right at the end to do that. It's very, very subtle, but if you were playing this at home or had your headphones on, a lot of the tree rustles and those sorts of things is me, like in the village where I live, and also Thetford Forest. So I grew up in Thetford, so there's a lots of scouting missions and environments around here that I've used, just because I know the area.
I'm assuming the cows in the was something that you did.
Yeah, not all of them. We did have to use some outsourced content, but the vast majority of things. I have to say, getting a cow to moo is probably one of the hardest things. You don't want to upset a cow, do you? Really? So yeah, there were things that we had to add in separately afterwards. Things like horse grunts and steps, a lot of that was recorded.
How about things like, because there is some weaponry and gunshot. Was there anything that you did with that, or is that a lot of that? Is that off the shelf sort of?
A mix. Again, it's like 80-90% of my own content with some stuff that's off the shelf, but a lot of the weapon noises, obviously I don't have things like that lying around, so you used things from the kitchen, bizarrely. So you just find things that are everyday objects, and then you change the pitch, you change the speed, you add different effects to it to make it sound more suitable. So for example, like there's scenes in the game where some of the characters are in the weaponry, and there's like a metal gate that springs open and closes. That's actually a cheese grater, right? It sounds great. No one would ever know that until now. And then there's other bits that I went into to try and make it sound ultra realistic, and I got into Norwich Castle, not without climbing on or anything. I got permission to go into Norwich Castle, and they actually closed it down early for me, so before all the public came in, because there's no point recording things if you're hearing speaking and chatter and all those little bits and pieces in the background. So I had some time before it opens early doors to go into the dungeon and record some of the ambient sounds, but also again handling noises of the doors, because there's scenes in the game where the apes get imprisoned without giving too much away, and some of the other characters. I actually used an ape skull as well that was from their archive, so a real ape skull, for some of the handling noises, because there was one scene in the game where it got thrown down, and so there's loads of stuff, loads and loads of backgrounds elements that no one else has ever done, and that's what I'm really proud of.
How important is it to get things like audio design on menu systems?
Yeah, really important, because this is the first thing that sometimes that people see. So if you go into the menu and it's it's just a token piece of audio, and the button sound effects aren't in time or are all exactly the same, then you've got the players. It's a different experience for someone. So don't make sure you're putting attention into that. It could be the very, very first thing they see, or the very last thing they see.
So just wondering if anyone has a final question. Steve, two final questions.
What advice would you have for someone who wants to get into sound design but doesn't really have any experience yet?
I would say is to find some content across a style that you particularly like. You're probably in a good place to be able to find that content, and to create a show reel that is whether it's you want to go synthesis based, whether you want to do more ambience, or whether you want to do Foley, but it's not until you experiment that you realise what you like doing and what you're good at. So don't sort of be put off by thinking you've got to do just one particular style and it doesn't turn out the way you want it to do. Keep trying different things and you will find something that you love and that other people love too.
How do you determine the sound of like ambient music, like ambient sound effects, for it to correctly impact the player?
Yeah, so well, that's a good question. So I would class ambience as background sound, and then so ambient music is more like soundscapes. So that's where again it's non-melodic music, but still has movement and evolves. So that's where you can put all these different variations in with volumes and all sorts of elements, characters and parameters to try and make it feel like it's changing without having that done in a notation form. Does that make sense? So it's a complementary element to the music. So a lot of this music in the game is done in that way because, as I say, if it was all big themes, you lose the impact when it gets to the moment you want those themes to take a hold, and equally it would be too much of the dialogue playing. So it just depends on what type of game you're making. Thanks very much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the interview with Stephen there. I thought it was really interesting when I did. I was really sort of intrigued by an awful lot of the things he does. It was a shame that we ran out of time. There's stuff that I never really got to talk to him about. He does an awful lot of library music, which I just find really fascinating. I just find the whole world of making music that has sort of a multi-purpose, so it could be written for one thing and it ends up being used in a completely different way. An example he gave me when we were chatting in the cafe was that he had a piece that was used for the on one of Mexico's broadcasters was used for the World Cup team whenever they were talking about the Mexican team, but then the same piece of music then turned up on a reality program in Australia, and it's kind of it's stuff like that I find really fascinating about library music. But you know, I know it's a little bit nerdy and geeky, and it wasn't quite in the sort of remit of talking about the game, but it would have been something I'd have loved to have talked to him about in a little bit more detail. So that's it. We're going to leave you with something that never quite got done for the game, and it was something that Stephen himself found quite frustrating. It's just because we ran out of time. It was a little bit chaotic, as you know from the conversation we had. A lot of stuff was sort of constantly moving right up to the end, and Stephen was getting stuff late, that sort of thing. But he wrote a piece of music that was supposed to be for the end credits, and it never went in, and in the end all we had was a sort of 30-second loop of music. And so at the end of this, I've put the credits sequence with Stephen's intended music over the top of it. So hopefully you can give that a watch and see how he planned it to look before sort of time got the better of us all. But that's it from me. We'll be coming back with some more streams and hopefully some more interviews in the future. But yeah, I'll just leave you to watch the end credits. Okay, bye.